Why am I even more dour right now than I was several months ago? It's inflation, it's the cost of everything, it's the affordability in our society. But you're crushing people, and we're going to walk through a little bit of that. But you've got to understand, and I'm sorry, I'm going to geek out on interest rates for a moment, but then I'm going to try to show what it actually means to everyone in this country. What we're doing to you, and so many of our brothers and sisters out there, you don't understand how, oh, I'm sorry, it's a sort of high-level technical economic term, how screwed you are. So let's sort of walk through this. We were building budgets a year ago on an assumption that U.S. sovereign debt, when you did the 2-year, the 5 years, the 10 years, the 20 years, the 30 years, okay, the blended interest rate, the weighted daily average, there's all these fun calculations. Were actually really interesting stuff. We were originally about 1.78 we thought would be our mean interest rate. Then last, what was it, was this March or May? March, we recalculated because of this thing called inflation. Oh, we're going to be up to 2.10. Then the reality of it is we ended up at a recalculation of, hey, the U.S. mean now is heading towards 2.85, and that's on the 10-year. We have some economists around us who are starting to say, it's going higher. It's going higher. And I'm going to show you a couple things here of what happens to us as a country if the way the Federal Reserve has to stop inflation is raising interest rates, breaking the labor market, because you understand within there, even though there's this delay effect, that also means what you and I have to pay the interest back on all the borrowing, and the biggest part of the borrowing cycle has not even hit us yet, because we're just now starting to absorb and get ready for the huge spike in costs because of our demographics. Remember, baby boomers, the final tail end of the baby boomers is moving into their retirement benefits. And as they get slightly older and a little bit older, the Medicare costs start to really go up, and we haven't even hit that financing cycle. It's coming. What happens if we have to finance that at the higher interest rates? So you start looking at some of this. 3 months T-bill back in March, 0.2, and that was our Biden administration estimate for the 3-year. The actual 3-year right now, 1.75. Let's see, what's the difference between a 0.20 and a 1.75? Can anyone say a whole lot? This may not mean much to you, but this is money your taxes are going to be paying back. So here's the punchline. I'm going to make it really, really, really simple. What if this inflationary cycle stuck with us? What if instead of that, what was it, 1.78 or even the 2.3% interest rate on U.S. sovereign debt, what if it were 2 points higher, just 2% higher, which functionally 15 years ago, that's where we were at. Remember, we actually had a reprieve, completely fake economic reprieve for a decade with artificially low interest rates. So we were borrowing, and the Federal Reserve kept interest rates lower, particularly since 2008. And now we're about to pay the cost of it. So what would happen if we paid that 2% higher? Functionally at the end, and my math is a little bit less, the end of 30 years, 100% of all tax receipts, of all taxes, all tariffs, everything that comes into the government, 100% goes just to pay interest. You got to understand how sensitive we are as a government, as a society, as a country now, how fragile we've made ourselves, because we're going to borrow what, another 1 to 1.3, there's one estimate, $1.4 trillion this year. We're never paying anything off. We're borrowing, and it gets worse and worse and worse and worse because our demographics as we get older, unless we crash the price of healthcare. So that's going to be 2 weeks from now. We're going to talk about things we could do to accomplish that. But are you prepared to live in a country that if our mean interest rate goes up 2%, stays there? all tax receipts go just to cover our interest. There's no more government, there's no more military, there's no more benefits, there's no more Social Security, there's no more Medicare. This is why it's so crucial around here to have an honest conversation where people put batteries in their calculator. Instead, this place is living on theater. Oh, modern monetary policy. We can spend all the money we want. Look, nothing happened. Oh, got it. Didn't work. And in many ways, I can show you right now, the largest tax increase in modern history has happened in the last year. If the fact of the matter, you live in my Phoenix, Scottsdale area, and you are a working person, you are a hard-working taxpayer, and you have not had a pay hike, do you realize you've lost 6 weeks, maybe more, of your labor? We're still at 12.1% inflation in my community. You've lost 6 weeks of your labor. If I'd walked in and said, hey, I'm going to take a month and a half of your salary and that's going to be my new tax hike, you would have lost your mind. But if we do it through this thing called inflation, where we strip the affordability of your groceries and your gasoline and everything else in your life, did you notice it? Well, you knew there's a problem. You know life has got much harder. You know sometimes you get to the checkout stand and you're taking things back because the price just doesn't work on your budget. And the perverse thing, you're going to see a chart here, my next one, where actually there's going to be this little drop in sort of the debt to GDP and those things. And that's because that inflation actually has been a tax. We lowered the value of your income. We lowered the value of your savings. By the same time, we lowered the value of all this debt, because we're going to pay it back with what we call inflated dollars, which is wonderful up until the next year or two when we have to refinance that debt and refinance the debt and refinance the new spending at the higher interest rates, and then that little benefit of taxing you through inflation goes away, and we're off to the races, and it becomes hell. And remember, this has brought down other countries for hundreds of years, and it's right in front of us. And no one seems to come behind these microphones and talk about it, educate about it. And for the last couple of years, I've come here behind these microphones and tried to show solutions, and then drives the lobbyists out of their minds. So let's take a look at this. And let's see if I can make this work. This is deficits during the Biden administration, fiscal year 23, budget baseline, versus a 1% rise in interest. Okay, do we all agree that we've had at least a 1% rise in interest rates? Yes. So do you see this one little bit of a fall right there? So this orange is what happens when you tack on the additional interest. That little fall is functionally the fact we devalued your dollar. That's our little benefit from taxing you with a way you didn't know. But then, boom, and functionally, the budget cycle we're about to work on is the 24 budget cycle. You're basically going to have a deficit of 1.4 trillion, and then boom, it's 1.5 trillion. You get out a couple more years, you're heading towards 1.75 trillion. In less than a decade, you're well over $2 trillion a year in just borrowing. And this chart explodes if we go beyond that 1% rise in interest rates. Structurally, even if I remove saying, hey, we're going to go back to living in that world of that fantasy artificially low interest rate, we're still heading towards $2 trillion a year borrowing. It just takes 10 years. This is insane. Functionally, right in here, interest will be just the basic borrowing, all of defense, a whole bunch of discretionary and other things will all live on borrowed money. And here, and look, most people have no idea what the concept of debt to GDP. It's the concept of, here's the size of my economy. And yes, we're borrowing all this money, but look how big my economy is, and that economy's ability to finance, just like your income finances your credit cards. And as long as your income keeps going up, faster than the debt on your credit cards, you can live. You're going to be okay. What happens when your economy isn't growing, your income isn't growing as fast as you're borrowing on those credit cards? At a certain point, it comes to an end.